Um, well, of course, I want to thank Barbara and Wyatt for inviting me to come back this summer and for the friendship they extend to all of us. Um, there's a lot I could say, but I just want to share how moved I've been this summer in particular, especially by the afternoon and evening readings. So many of the stories and poems we've heard have been written by people who have more compassion than I can articulate. And the heart of the work has touched me this time. I'm grateful to my colleagues. I also want to just say 2 years ago, not long after the conference was concluded, I received this very nice ink pen in the mail from Claudia Emerson. And every poem I've written since then has been written with this pen. Here's a poem for Claudia and her husband, Kent. An orchard at the bottom of the hill. Why don't you try just being quiet? If you can find some silence, maybe you can listen to it. How it works is interesting. I really can't explain it, but you know it when it's happening. You realize you're marveling at apple blossoms and how they're clustered on the tree, and you see the bees meticulously attending every blossom there, and you think the tree is kind of sighing. Such careful beauty in the making. And then you think, it's really quiet, but I am not alone in this world. That's how you know it's happening. There's something solemn and wonderful in the quiet, a slow and steady ease. Whether the tree is actually sighing is beside the point. It's better to wonder. You needn't be precise with quiet. It just becomes another thing. It isn't a science. It's an art, like love, or a dog who's pretty good, asleep in the grass beneath the tree. Alicia, I'm going to go out on a classical limb here. I think this is an epic simile. As plucking blackberries in the face. As plucking blackberries in the face of a sullen praying mantis, oh, dalliance between hand and the mystic pose. So holiness deprives the one who lives by hunger. Though the fruit may bruise and the fingers blindly reaching out may come back pricked by thorns or love. Mumbledy-peg. You don't see people whittling like you used to. It's like whittling is out, along with mumbledy-peg, the kind of game some boys would play in a barn some afternoon. People are tired of the old Americana stuff, the hokey scenes on calendars, the beauty of a cat-eye marble. And yet, if you're a whittler, all you need is time, a pocket knife, and a stick, and you're in business. I had a teacher who made a dog from a bar of soap right there in the classroom in front of us. We marveled how the shape took shape. I made a fantastical rooster once from a stick. His comb was out of proportion to his little body. He wasn't persuasive as a rooster, but who expects a rooster to be persuasive anyway? And my grandfather carved an elephant from a peach pit. The skill he had is evident, but I wonder why he wanted to use something small to represent something large. What was going through his mind in 1920, whenever it was? In a drawer somewhere, I have the knife. The handle is made from bone, and the blades are worn down to nubs. I used to use it when I played mumbledy-peg. The old knife is sitting there in the drawer with some cat-eye marbles and a couple of dominoes. I used to like to hear them click together. It was a very particular click. I told somebody I would read this poem because it has multiple prepositions strung together. This is called Leave It Lay. Leave it lay is something I heard growing up often. You better not come up in here with rabbit on your breath, by God. That's something someone who likes rabbits would say. To exaggerate his envy for someone who's recently enjoyed some rabbit. But from the point of style, the exclaim has a problem or two. It's like a string of empty freight cars with preposition painted on the sides has left the tracks, and the engine goes chugging on, and the poor rabbit is stuck in the middle of nowhere with God. You can't even talk the sentence into making sense, but you know what it means. One of the miracles of language. It doesn't bother me if people use bad English as long as they have something interesting to say. What really irks me, though, is someone who uses good English to say nothing, or good English to spout a bunch of lies and half-truths. It's like English is a can of oil so people can talk slick and slide around the truth. They do bad things with good English. Some people are so good at it, even they don't know what they're saying. It's like they've got mud in their ears. I'll tell you what, I've heard a lot of smart people in my day who know the language but don't know what it's good for. You can cover a lot of ground with English. You can talk your way to beauty, and you can tell the truth. But I think the truth exists before the words. It's like the rabbit and God out there in the middle of nowhere. There's an old blues song that has many versions called Stagger Lee. There it is. Sort of the plot of the song is Stagger Lee and another guy get in a fight over a hat. And Stagger Lee kills the man for a hat. So this is called Stagger Lee. Cold night. The moon looks like it's wearing a hat pulled down at a dangerous angle across its head. I can remember my father wearing a hat like that. There is the angle of light and the angle of shadow made by the light. Reflection and something else. Absorption, perhaps, the tendency of the dark to draw things farther in to the very depths of the dark, and yet, even within the dark is a glow. I'm one who's been attracted to that a realm beyond the knowable that seems to sit there looking out. You come into this world with a life, and a lot of it is gone before you begin to understand it. So it's been for ages. So much life is ended by brutality. Yet even a bad man has a song. That's very tender irony. What wise saying or metaphor can account for that? There isn't any. I'm for the plainest speech when it comes to this. The bent brow of the moon looks like it's wearing a hat. That's plain enough. And men are terrible at times, defiant to the end. The shaded top of the moon presents this thought to me, how a man could kill another man over a hat, how both could live infamously in a song with many variations. That's sort of the blues, a kind of truth, uncertain, unaccountable, and mythic, larger than the fact of two men sitting in a room or one man studying the moon. So much reflection, so much reflection. I was thinking earlier today about 2:30 of the sun coming up twice today. And for me, that second rising was the presence of Rodney Jones walking across the parking lot. This is a poem I wrote for him. House Cat. House Cat, that was you in the scene, rambling away with that book of village voices in your head, a country chorus tuned between the end times and a dirty look. You grinned and listened. To the dead? To something upside down and fast. How daddy done this and mama done worse. A little love behind the curse to hear the thing that lasts. The sound of someone cloth invented, composed of voices that were real, to wander cotton-eyed, lamented, that the born again may learn to feel the life and resurrection both are living in the world we love. A catfish rising from the froth, old underling for the realm above. We must admit disorder here, how beauty broken is all we've got, the bubbles of long-held air released to dispel a kind of fear, the plopping gurgle in the gut. And given where we've gone, it's fair. So not dead yet. I'm with you too. We're tied to the task that never ends, for those with rhythm burning through. Sign me Yardbird, Hambone, friend. The last few months I've gotten awfully rhymey, which is probably better than getting roomy. Madam, as I was napping in our bed, resting my poetic head, on honeydew I must have fed, I half remembered what you said about our pleasant matrimony, although your feet be long and bony. The yard outside is still too stony, and the child should one day have a pony. And the aged house could use some paint and someone's habits more restraint. The piled up piles have made you faint. And is you is or is you ain't my baby? Baby, I is. Can't you hear the arrows whiz? There needn't be this kind of quiz around this house. Ain't you the Miz? Such is the happy recollecting when half asleep I lay reflecting, amused to daydream you're objecting to my dogged verse, and worse, neglecting the countless things that must get done, and each more meaning than a pun, though I must add a little one. Let's let love be played, but never won. Moving through the house. I am careful not to make much noise at night when other people are sleeping. My moving through the house is slight. Sometimes I rise from the chair to reach a book and see what someone says in silent words, and imagine the mind that said them first to itself in silence. Someone writing a book at night, someone later reading the book at night. This is an old house. I will become an old man in this house. Sometimes I leave my ghost in the house and step out on the porch to see the miracle of stars turning in their wheel and wonder if a man moving through the house is still a practical metaphor. So far it is. It reconciles. The house is civilizing. The man is loyal. The book reveals a mind refining itself for later minds. A life is mended. Nothing is ended. The sleepers sleep in the provinces of love laid out below the stars. The cold night ticks in time. The man walks back into the house and finds the book he was looking for. Chicken bristle. There's a place near here called Chicken Bristle. It's not a very hopeful name, but it's out in the country and quiet. A handful of houses are clustered along a lane. The land is rolling and secret and dark. My grandmother lived there when she was a girl, but then it was known as Turnersville if you were white. If you were black, you lived in Chicken Bristle, Kentucky. I've seen a map that says the place is Turnersville, but then a pair of parentheses has Chicken Bristle between the crescent moon-like curves. The curves are like unspoken verses, and Chicken Bristle is more than a name. But I don't think anyone, black or white, prospered there. It was just a place to live and long and love your people. It wasn't a place for prospering, and anyway, enriching yourself with simple riches isn't really prosperity. It's better to know the land around you is rolling and dark, pastoral and lulling and hard. You set your mind and body to work and hope the work will reach your heart, to see in that repose some beauty, some meaning for a human life. And there you have it, America, your history in brief. I think you need to live and long and love your people. I'm writing this poem while my daughter sleeps in quiet peace. Only the sound of my pen scratching its marks on the page, her whistling breath. It's late in the night. One of these days I'm going to take her to Chicken Bristle and hold her up to the air and the wild and say to her, part of you, my love, comes from Chicken Bristle, this dark and lulling place sprung up like a thistle patch among the hills. But isn't it beautiful? Isn't there sweetness in the very air? Karina read a poem yesterday morning at her reading, and she mentioned her grandmother, who's from a town in southeastern Kentucky, Letcher County, a town called Blackie, Blackie, old coal mining town. I told Karina after reading that I was thinking of reading a poem in which I refer to an encounter with a man who was a very skilled moonshiner in those parts. This is called Frog Eyes. An old man told me once, if you shake a jar of moonshine and two bubbles roll together at the brim of the jar, it proves what's in the bright realm below is the kind of shine you'll want to drink in small, judicious sips. He called the bubbles that roll together frog eyes and shook the jar he had to show me. It's a very accurate description. Yet, there's something upside down in the image, which is the rest of the frog, stuck to a heaven out of view. I noticed once, peering down from a branch, a pair of raindrops, and even saw reflected in them upside down the little blur of the world they captured, black branches and the blank, silent speck of distance reaching back beyond the blur. Two tiny drops to see, and see inside, yet tinier in each, a world turned upside down, and the scarecrow figure that was me, and green-gray peeping frogs, not birds, were singing from the tree. By God, I'm a ham-eating fool. Not every poem has to be so dire or filled with tragedy. A poem can put your mind at ease, assuming you like your mind at ease. I do. I like to slow things down. You have to take it easy now and then, you know. Step back from your life to see how things are going. Unless you're living in a war or surrounded by violence, things are pretty good. Don't get me started on violence. A lot of people make money from it, and it comes in many forms. I'll leave it at that. I've found if you have a tree, you can be very happy and pleased with your life. Of course, you have to look and stare up through its branches, but that's not hard to do. A tree is pretty much a miracle. It does no harm in the world. If a tree is in your life, you've got it made. I'm not suggesting you lounge around in a smoking jacket with a plate of ham sitting in front of you. That would be high cotton indeed, but if you've got a tree, it's easy some summer evening to see the light of dusk rippling through the leaves like water and ask yourself in a voice of utter indolence, I wonder what the poor folks are doing tonight. And then when a big-faced owl lights in the tree, you'll think you're a king. Two days after we left the conference last summer, my wife Amanda was very great with child. My father had a stroke and died a few months later. And it was something of a blurry time last fall to be in the presence of life coming into the world and life coming out at the same view. I'm still figuring out how to interpret that and what to make of it. But this is a poem I wrote when my father was very out of commission. Mr. True. My father used to drink a lot and get filled with rage, but sometimes he'd fall into a strange combination of melancholy and affection for complete strangers, fellow drinkers who were having hard times too, harder, and he had understanding. I'd hear them stumble in the door, my father likely singing verses from a heart-sick, gloomy song. And then this stranger would be in the house. The stranger had nowhere else to go, was the reason. Then my father would hang an arm over the stranger's shoulder, his Good Samaritan routine. It was kind of pitiful to be a boy and have this going on. My father would wake me up to meet the stranger, and the stranger would humor me. He'd pull a quarter from behind my ear or pop the false teeth out of his mouth and suck them back like an animal who could do a trick. One night, a giant appeared in our kitchen. That's right, and his name was Mr. True. He was over 7 feet tall. There wasn't any trick to that. I thought he really was a giant. He could hardly stand up straight in the room. He didn't fit in a normal house. In the morning, I found Mr. True still asleep on the floor. His feet stuck out from the blanket. They looked like a pair of fishing boats I'd seen in books, absent the sails. Later, he took me outside and set me high up on his shoulders. It was higher than I had ever been, except in a tree. I was a little sailor, perched at the top of a mast, and then Mr. True teetered around and dropped me on the shore of the porch and floated away forever. A lot of my childhood was filled with sorrow, as if someone had planted a garden of sadness and lonely things were always blooming. But once or twice, it was magical. I met a giant named Mr. True, and I learned that taking in a stranger is a decent thing to do, and you can do it singing. Whatever torment my father knew, he had a heart for strangers and their suffering, and a song to bring them through the door. The other night at the graveyard reading, I read the final section of Robert Penn Warren's long and monumental poem, Audubon, A Vision. That begins, "Tell me a story." The book that I usually read that poem in is a used book. I picked it up somewhere, and someone else before me had made notes all through the book, and I've enjoyed reading the notes of a previous reader, even if I disagree with them. But this is a poem I wrote going back and reading my notes in the margins of the poem and somebody else's notes. This is called A Crooked Star in Pencil on a Page. For some reason, I misremembered a star someone made in the margin, but there wasn't a star when I went back to the page of the haunted Gothic poem that hangs in my mind like a coat on a hook. Only a few words in ink here and there to explain a passage. One little fragment I like is this: pessimistic about life. On the page before, gun is underlined, and later a darker line is drawn below imagination. It's strange, but you can skim these notes, almost illegible, and get the feel of the larger poem and what the poet, the younger one, was apprehending. She, for I think it was a she, puts it well in a difficult sentence. Time is man's enemy, can't stop time. Being a later reader of the book, I put a star beside the sentence an unknown reader made between the stanzas of a poem I love and drag behind me like a shadow. As for me, I have no enemies. I guess I disagree, but I like a difficult sentence, the clash of things to say. That's why I made the star. It's an old song called Listen to the Mockingbird. Who had a visitor? Jill had a visitor in the night from a mockingbird. I like a quiet little house with dreamy trees around it. Let the house contain a kind of mind, and let the realm of dreamy trees be a mind more infinite, and let the mind in the house discover by beautiful degrees it lives inside the infinite mind of trees. When the mind residing in the house wakes from its little sleep in the dead of night to hear the mockingbird fiddling around with its voice from the top of the tallest tree, the mind that's smaller will know the infinite mind, which is unreasonable, is there in the permanent blur of green singing. I always find this dilemma sweet, to fill the space of contemplation with desirable symbols in order to speak about the things that aren't symbolic. And there's a lot that's not symbolic. I mean, infinity is real. Only the mind cannot contain it. So you put a little symbol there, a candle burning through a window, or a coffee tin with buttons in it. Or back in the days of dynasties, you took a piece of silk and painted cherry blossoms down the side with a mist hanging over the valley. It's all pretty mysterious, but some of the symbols you can find are starkly beautiful. I like the coffee tin with buttons in it. It's not an ordinary symbol, and you have to know it's full of buttons, or else you'll miss the larger meaning. Love child. I guess I have a love child now. I mean, I have a child to love whose summary, like love in her face, who came into the world divinely when leaves were on the trees, though turning. The way of love for me before she came was crookedy, but now it's clear. The rhyme I've listened for is here. Internal swirl, my heart is full of a little girl. The poem I'll want to write from now until my final verse will be for her, with her in mind, who will say the words I heard in a loving voice for her. Two more somewhere, if I can get there. Pissing in the rain. Sometimes when it's really raining, I like to step out on the porch and take a big old country piss. It is a wayward thing to do for those who are stubborn and sometimes go through the world unsettled according to how one has learned and comes to need. Not taking the straight path, being unable is what I mean. And the point is not some happiness. Usually I wait for dark and let it go. Just listening to the splattering sound and the sound of the rain, pissing, pretending to be rain, and rain beginning in the heavens. It is a solemn ceremony. At first, it feels like taunting heaven as a figure in a murder ballad, but the moment is caught by infinity, and then the heaven drowns me out. The loud silence that follows it. That's what I'm looking for out there. Oh, I'm sorry. I have two more. One is a bit on the longest side. Longer than what I've been reading. This is more rain. After reading Charles Wright, I turn out the light and listen to the rain. Protestant American darkness is always worldly, beginning in failure, a failure that deepens in time to acquire a punishing weight that can't be shaken, though it's always failure in worldly terms. The material way to the easy life falls short. The good times don't last. No thought of living beyond the life within the span of the living life. And then the melancholy turn, the great American illusion, inert, nothing living in it, unless you think despair is alive. Darkness, according to the Eastern beliefs I've casually encountered, is not as absolute. If you don't quite make the illuminated tree, you can settle for the shadow behind it. At least it's calm in such a shade, a deep shadow, like being asleep. I could live with the deep shadow approach. Eastern enlightenment, I've noted, doesn't need to be as light. The symbolic mountain is calmly cold and usually shrouded in a mist. A rain has tossed the blossoms down, though a few remain on the dark branch. The watercolor is washed out. In the West, we like a golden explosion. Enlightenment is a spectacle and not connected to anything, an anomaly that's just for us. Mountains and valleys and long views, the dead veins of a dropped leaf, distances, the calliope music of birds, silence and slow time. I've wanted to believe that art and life could share a common purpose, the aesthetic implying the ethical, a way of being and going on. I could be wrong about that. We'll see. I know I have to loosen my lines and stop drowning the inexplicable sorrows in order to clarify the ditty that drifts down the page. None of that is important. Let them go, forever unexplained. And I must free myself from the left margin to let the line float alive, symbolically back and forth or out of sight, like a leaf in water. The figure, the phrase, alive to its own motion, entwined with the other motion below, or popping up in the water somewhere approaching the other side. Whatever is on the other side, something defining the space around it, even an awkward, absent space. It looks like a dropped line to me. I still can't do it unconsciously, and still can't break it all apart on purpose to leave the sense of meaning behind. And so, more learning, more reading, more sitting alone, though not alone, the opposite of alone, in fact. You go beyond yourself to find the place, vast or intimate or both, where you belong and yet remain unknown, merely dissolved in the cosmic watery hum of the place, a serenity sometimes known in the world. And the verse becomes about the place and the hush of belonging to it all. There's no point in doing any of this if all you're going to do is complain. Anger stiffens everything. What a waste of time. You have to go for wonder that's simply out there, and wonder that comes from reflection and waiting, or appears to appear coldly from nothing and quietly ticks in unknown time. I'll probably have to study Italian. God knows what else I'll have to do. Last one, there's a collection of poetry that Louis Untermeyer put together in the 50s for children called The Golden Treasury of Poetry. Some of you may have cut your teeth on a book like that. We have a daughter cutting her teeth at the very moment, and I've read to her from this book. She has so far has little interest in it. But I've enjoyed the book myself all over again, and wrote the final poem I'll read is sort of a riff on that. This is called The Golden Treachery of Poetry. I've got a yodel and a half, another yodel, inside of me, and a verse or two of Tweedledee to run a possum up a tree, or just to make a dandy noise for occasions when I use my voice as if it were a harmonica. And now and then I find repose by strumming my fingers against my nose, and humming melodiously I free the one-stringed banjo that lives beside the yodel and a half I keep in me, and the verse or two of Tweedledee. And of course I save some room for serious poetry because I believe, my friends, in beauty with a capital B and dirt with a D. But a banjo in a serious poem, or a poem searching for truth with a T, may cause the poem to fall just short of perfection, or encourage the poet to resolve the poem by claiming he can do a convincing imitation of a chicken, practicing the art of silence in moody contemplation. Thank you.